Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Alec, and I'm going to be here today to help answer any of your general or technical questions that you have. But before we get started, I'd like to go over a couple of things that you should know before the webinar kicks off. There will be no dial-in number for today's webinar. All audio will be streamed through your computer, speakers, or headphones, so please adjust your volume there accordingly. Right here you should see a red box on the right-hand side of your screen. That red box is there just to highlight where you can submit questions for today's speaker, and you can download a PDF in the handout section there, and that's the bottom icon within that red box. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to that recording in a follow-up email. Please allow at least 2 business days before that information is sent. That same PDF that's available right now for download will be included in that follow-up email, along with your HRCI and SHRM certification codes. So please keep your eye on your mailboxes for that. Also, I want to just let you know, please do keep an eye on your spam folders for these follow-up emails, as sometimes these auto-generated webinar emails can be flagged as spam. So your HRCI and SHRM information will be in those follow-up emails. All right, so before we get started, I'm just going to give you a brief introduction of today's speaker. Today we have with us Carla Johnson. Carla is the Manager of HR Strategies and Initiatives for Advanced Education with the Alberta Public Service. It has been great working with Carla up to this point, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy today's webinar and the chance to interact with her. So Carla, let's get started.
Great, thank you. Thanks everyone, first of all, for taking the time to log in today. I'm really pleased to be here with you, and thank you to CLO. I'm delighted to be able to work with such a progressive and insightful organization. I really admire the pioneering community this organization consistently brings together, champions, and celebrates, and I'm honored to be a part of it, contributing to the thoughtful progress of this community. Lately, I've had the pleasure of attending a number of webinars launched by the CLO that have been exploring some really forward-looking approaches to organizational learning in a variety of contexts, and I'm truly happy to be able to contribute to this series. So thank you, CLO, for being so supportive of our work together. So to get going, I'm going to talk a little bit, and during that time, I hope you will be coming up with some good questions, so we can get to those later. Like Alec mentioned, I'm Carla Johnson, an organizational development leader with the Alberta Public Service. I've spent my career creating opportunities for people to learn and build their skills, from guiding young learners in the education sector to supporting professionals in the public sector and the post-secondary system here. I'm also an entrepreneur and a leader of strategic change, and I like to make connections across unexpected ideas and people. I'm a builder of communities, and I'm passionate about supporting those communities in leveraging their strengths to accomplish their goals. My innate drive to innovate with and through others finds its way into all my conversations, including my coaching practice. I'm committed to building capacity within networks of people to build relationships and organizations. Currently, I lead a team of 5 human resource strategists, developing and engaging an organization of approximately 700 professionals. But that's enough about me. I just wanted to give you an insight into my motivation, perspective, and drive. I'd like to share with you today the story about the initiative called Own Your Own Journey that's now embedded in the work of my team. But first, here is the roadmap for our time together and how I intend to share this journey with you. I'll provide some context for the journey in terms of key organizational features, as well as my team's approach. I'll move into sharing some tools of our trade, and these will be peppered throughout the story as I share the journey. Then I'll move into sharing the pathway that many individuals in my organization are on as we speak, and I'll also share with you the pathway that my team is moving along in order to support those individuals. Then I'll pull it all together and share the overall framework. So by the end of our session together, you will have some tools, an approach, a pathway, our journey and the story and the context, as well as lessons learned. So to begin, I'd like to give you a bit of context around where I'm situated. the sector I'm embedded in, and the organization in which I work. This is particularly important to share with you as this is a prototype project that I'm going to talk about with you today. And with prototypes, there are a number of learnings that you can take away, but you have to understand the context in which the project is embedded. As you're likely aware, a prototype is most closely associated these days with systemic and human-centered design methods. Prototyping is the process by which we try in rapid succession different approaches in meeting a challenge or solving a problem, and each time a solution or version of the prototype is launched, it's evaluated in terms of its impact and success. This evaluation is then used to inform the next version or next rapid prototype and released with tweaks that are meant to improve upon itself over and over. Prototypes tend to be very responsive to the environment in which they exist. That's why it's important to share with you the context in which this initiative is emerging, but more on prototyping later. Please let me share with you a bit about my environment. I'm currently sitting here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and I'm a public servant here in Alberta. I take a lot of pride in that role, and I'm also happy to have carved out a place in the organization where it's my central function to engage and enable the people around me in achieving their highest potential. I work for the Alberta Provincial Public Service. We currently have more than 20 ministries and over 20,000 employees. I'm with the Ministry of Advanced Education. We fund, regulate, and support the adult learning system in the province of Alberta. This system includes post-secondary institutions, community and adult learning centers, as well as apprenticeship and trades programs. I'm part of the Human Resources team in Advanced Education. Our human resources business model can be characterized as distributed, and that's what I've depicted here, meaning we have a central or corporate human resources that is largely a policy shop that governs the HR of all ministries. The distributed part, though, is that each ministry has its own HR resources. Each ministry-based HR department has its own business supports and organizational development teams. Each ministry also has the freedom to structure its HR departments to suit the needs of the ministry it serves. These ministry-level HR departments serve the business needs of its ministry, as well as ensuring alignment with the broader policies that are led from the central HR division. I have the privilege of leading the strategic organizational development team in my ministry, one of those distributed teams. The pieces of work that occupy my team are things like succession management and talent development informed by workforce analytics, organizational design and change, leadership, talent development, workplace culture, and employee engagement, including recognition, onboarding, and orientation, as well as occupational health, safety, and employee wellness. So the reason I bring this to your attention is that the structure of the organization accounts for the opportunity that my team and I have to leverage long-standing foundational programs that are well established in the organization. These foundational legacy programs are guided and mandated by the Central HR Policy Department. As my team is embedded in one of the decentralized departments, I have the opportunity to benefit from these solid programs combined with the ability to innovate and prototype with agility at the ministry level as my team creates programs that respond to business needs and demands of the people in our own ministry. It's a win-win for initiatives like the one that I'm going to share with you today. And it's worth mentioning that each of the HR departments are very different and reflect the ministry or components of the organization in which they are embedded. I have the good fortune of being in a ministry that guides adult learning in my province, so lifelong learning is a necessary preoccupation of the people who work with me. It's an advantage for a team like mine, wanting to push the envelope on learning and development. So my team and I have a particular approach or lens that we apply broadly to all of our work. My team and I endeavor to increase the level of excellence in our organization, specifically in terms of how we work together and serve each other. We, that is my strategic HR team, are taking a human-centered approach to our work. What this means for us is that every time a program comes up for renewal, every time a need emerges in the organization that prompts a response from my team, We look at our developing program through the lens of the human being that will experience or interact with our solution, and make sure that the program is intuitive to our people. We ask questions of ourselves that keep our focus on creating solutions for people that will in turn benefit the organization. We determine what the needs of our people are and create solutions that meet those needs, given our context. I'll talk more specifically about the tools we use to really get a feel for how our people experience our services in just a bit. My team is highly preoccupied right now with talent development. I know we're not alone in that. We spend a lot of time and effort attracting, recruiting, selecting great talent, just like all of your organizations. So, like many of you, once our talent has been recruited and we have talented people all around us, we ask questions like, how do we ensure our workforce develops so we're able to meet the demands of current and future needs? In short, how do we develop our people? How do we develop the talent that's already in our organization so our organization can continue to be successful? The usual way of thinking through this particular challenge is to develop programs and training sessions to meet the needs that we in human resources determine to be pertinent and priority based on our organization's needs. By looking at our business areas, we can assess skills we have, determine skills we believe we will need, and we identify that skills gap, develop new or identify existing programming that will close the gap and put the relevant people through the training to skill them up, and voila. The skills are now in the organization, and we can look at identifying the next skills gap. And so the cycle goes. Although in tune with the business and desired outcomes for the organization, this method may or may not meet the needs of the people in the organization. We cannot discount this method of talent development by any means, not entirely. There are some who excel with this system of talent development. We have, after all, many people who are very successful in many highly successful organizations, and we can continue to perpetuate this system. However, we have the opportunity to try something a bit different. What if we approach an approach to talent development that would open the possibility of development and growth to a broad scope of people and put the tools in their hands that can enable them to do their own skills gap analysis, as well as the tools to fill those gaps? What if we were able to reach beyond the usual suspects? And I think you likely know who I mean by usual suspects. Those are the people we can easily identify as those who will develop the necessary skills and lead us forward into the future. Our high potential employees, our overachievers destined to success, those people we often tap to contribute to our key projects. But what if we could meet the needs of both those usual suspects as well as others who haven't necessarily caught our attention yet, but are sitting with so much potential? What if we cast a wider net, developed more people in our organizations for whom development opportunities were not always available? And what if, during the process, the organization realized immediate benefits as well? But how can we develop programs that meet the needs of so many in the organization? It's true that we can develop high-level, broadly applicable training programs, but those are likely so broad that timely relevance may be a challenge. And those programs will meet the needs of the organization, but they may not meet the needs of the people, keeping in mind this is a basic tenet of my team's approach. On the other hand, we can't go tailoring the development of programs to each individual. That's not precisely reasonable. So many of us aim in the middle, and we try and strike a balance. And so then we're back to that same cycle I just mentioned a moment ago about identifying skills gaps and filling them. What if we made a few learning and development concepts salient to everyone? I'm talking about concepts that many people realized at one point or another, but have either forgotten or have been unable to enact for any number of reasons. In an age where we speak about lifelong learning as the only way to remain relevant, it makes some intuitive sense then that we make some foundational concepts around learning and development evidence. I would suggest that one of the most pivotal pieces of knowledge that can be imparted when it comes to developing people is to make the process of learning a touchstone for everyone. In my mind, I see the journeys we are on something like a map with many, many possible roads. There are key features of the map that are not obvious, but can be revealed with the right lens or maybe with the right vehicle. I'll stick with the same metaphor here. We can make the journey on the map and the necessary stops along the pathway more obvious. The pathways and those rest stops are what we need to keep the traveler moving along their chosen path, as opposed to others who cannot read the map and end up stalled out or stranded somewhere far from their destination. The core conviction that I hold that is key to the approach is that if we invite people to identify their own developmental needs and create an environment where the mechanisms to meet those needs were available, obvious, and readily accessible, people who want to go on that journey are potentially unstoppable. That's an attractive proposal. What if organizations relinquish control of the developmental pathway to its people simply by empowering them with the foundational knowledge around human learning? Essentially, we would have people who are able to navigate their own developmental journey and would bring immeasurable value to whatever organization made this possible. We have begun in our department with a number of programs to place them on that metaphorical map, creating a self-navigable map for our people. And we are in the process of learning from our work, reimagining how our process can be applied to novel situations or the next program. That's the prototyping piece I had mentioned earlier. As we learn and develop ourselves through this process, we're committed to keeping our people at the center of our work, and we're broadening our human-centered approach as we go. What this means down at the program level, where programs meet their people, is that we don't know exactly what the final product is going to look like when we're finished and the whole program is complete. In fact, it will likely always be a work in progress, always shifting and changing to reflect the needs of our people as they grow to meet evolving business demands. We create something, test it out, evaluate, and try again, keeping what works and evolving what needs to. We do this after every iteration. We evaluate and evolve each time. This is rapid prototyping. What we do know is that every step is done with and for our people, and every decision, every step is evidence-based on quantitative data when possible and on anecdotal evidence, our observation, and our partners' feedback. So to recap my story so far, my team relies on the ideation and prototyping cycle with an emphasis on empathy and understanding our people at the front end. This process makes our human resources team a human-centered one. At the beginning of this process, we think about the experience of our people and their many variations they will have when they encounter our program, or perhaps where they do not encounter our program or a facet of it, and where and how one might be helpful. Our favorite tool at this stage is journey mapping. This is the process of putting yourself in the shoes of the person or people in question and trying to experience something from start to finish in those shoes, thinking through as many aspects of the thing or the journey in question as possible, resisting the temptation to think from our own perspective as the organization. We've supported this experience through the use of interviews with key or representative people in our organization to better understand how they experienced one of our programs. Stakeholder interviews are a key tool for our journey mapping. For example, my team interviewed a number of leaders in our organization who had taken our leadership training in order to determine what their experience had been like from the point they enrolled for the training from the time they were finished. Empathy and understanding the people who will interact with the solution is fundamental to our work, and we work very hard to understand the needs and desires of the people we're supporting. Through this process, we come to understand and define our challenge, where we are able to improve the experience and advance our program. Ideation is the process of coming up with many, many ideas that we believe would meet the needs of our people. We sift through those ideas, forge new ones, and design a solution. And once we've created, test it out, we roll out our prototype, and we evaluate based on the feedback from our users. Then we can either improve our approach, move on to applying what we learned to the next program. Rapid testing and evaluation is fundamental so that we can improve with each iteration. This is our process, and it's a common process in human-centered design. Now, through the use of this human-centered design, we are creating and evolving an approach to talent development, wherein the people in our organization are invited to own their own developmental journey. It's my team's responsibility to ensure there are adequate and appropriate resources along the way to support many, many people on their journeys. It's this journey that I want to share with you now. It's a pathway that guides continuous progression step after step, using some basic learning and development principles. This pathway is first positioned as an individual progression, and then I'll share with you my team's own pathway and how we interact with our people on their journeys. So now I'd like to pose for you a few questions to reflect on. How many of you have taken formal training of some sort recently with the intention of increasing your knowledge and skills on a particular topic, a workshop, or a conference? It's my assumption about your attendance at that training that you are engaged in that training in good faith, and there are 3 things you intend to come away with. Connection with potentially like-minded, curious people who can broaden your thinking or influence your growth in some way. Some sort of emotion, satisfaction, exhilaration, curiosity, and lastly, the nuts and bolts of the information that was shared by the experts leading the training, the new knowledge itself. So now, if you want to use the chat to respond to the questions, you're welcome to. How many of you recall some of the people you met or the conversations and interactions you had at that training? Good, so there's the people part. Were you able to evaluate the course or conference or whatever that training might have been? Were you able to evaluate it? Good. So that would indicate the emotion part. I hope your expectations were met and you experienced some satisfaction. So that's the emotion part. Third, and now be honest with yourself here, how many of you remember what you learned? Good. So that's the first step. Excellent. Now, how many of you were not only able to remember the information, you were able to apply what you learned? You were actually able to use it. And now, how many of you assessed how that went for you and your colleagues? You intentionally examined the impact of what you learned when you applied it at work so that it informed what you did next, and it changed how you did something. If you managed that full cycle, that is excellent. This full cycle of taking in new information and being able to apply it and make it your own, although it does happen sometimes, it's not as consistent as we need it to be. It's not a reliable outcome of training. And to be clear, it's not necessarily that the training itself was faulty or terrible. There was just something missing on the rest of the journey. So thank you for playing along and answering the questions. As I said, it's difficult to manage to complete those steps. We don't get to follow it consistently, even when we're aware of how we can make learning real in our lives. When people aren't aware of the basic pathway itself, the odds of successful transition of new knowledge into practice are even lower. So this cycle, or pathway as I like to call it, takes the complex process of learning and continuous development and it makes it manageable. It makes clear the simple relationship between theory or new knowledge and the application of that new knowledge so that anyone can make the connection over and over. And folks, there's nothing new here. When you break it down into its component parts, it's all familiar. In fact, there are pieces of this process already happening in various places in your organization, guaranteed. The unique piece of this pathway is how they're mapped together, how those steps are mapped together. Those 2 pieces of theory or new knowledge and the application of that knowledge is what we need to inspire continuous improvement and development. Those 2 that don't always get the chance to go together is what we need to keep moving forward in our developmental journey. And continuous improvement is what we know we need to make happen in order to keep up with the emergent demands we all face. We're so diligent at taking in theory. We've all been to so many conferences and workshops and courses. We're very good at making plans to make something happen. And they're very good plans, but oftentimes, they remain as plans only, and we don't get to implementation or application of our plans. When you have theory and practice, you've implemented, you've reflected on how these things intersect in your world. When you've learned it, you've tried it, you've adjusted your approach or continued with next steps based on the results of your actions. You're on an individual pathway of learning and development. You have a meaningful individual learning experience or a development pathway. If you adopt that as a practice, potentially endless, you have that pathway I was talking about. There are only a few more things you need to put in place to be on your way. As with any map, it's not much good to you as far as guidance is concerned if you don't know where you're situated on the map. You need to know where you are on the map so you know your starting point, and you can determine your next step that will take you from one point to another in an intentional way. And you know what I really appreciate about a good map, where nearby gas stations and rest stops pop up. Sometimes I need them and sometimes I don't, but it sure is great to have the option. If you've ever been driving and found yourself fruitlessly hoping for a rest stop, wishing you'd stopped at the one a while back, you can appreciate what I mean. Those rest stops are sometimes hidden on our maps, sometimes, unless they're very good ones. Those rest stops, that's what I mentioned earlier. If you know where those stops are coming up, we can plan our journey accordingly. Once these steps on the pathway are on a loop, new knowledge to an available rest stop, to application, to reflective evaluation, which in and of itself creates new knowledge, can then feed back into the cycle again. And from this particular point about evaluation creating new knowledge, I'd like to take the opportunity to point out that this new knowledge that we've been talking about is an input to the pathway. It doesn't have to come from formal training. New knowledge can be acquired from formal training, but we all know that knowledge comes from many other sources beyond training. So once again, new knowledge with the option of some kind of rest stop to application of knowledge in practice to reflective evaluation, leading to new knowledge and so on and so forth. This loop can be applied again and again and overlaid onto any map. Much like once you've figured out how to drive, your mechanics as the driver can be applied over and over again, no matter what the road or destination. The driver has an innate knowledge of where they are. Then they determine where they want to go, and so being the driver, this person gets into their automobile, turns the key in the ignition, and you know how it goes from there as the driving gets underway. On occasion, our driver has to stop for gas or directions or coffee or a recharge or whatever, and then the process begins again. The driver gets back into the vehicle, turns the key, etc. This is a familiar cycle that is implemented over and over again, regardless of the destination. The same concept of a cyclical pathway applies here to individual development. So let's take a look a bit more closely at the pathway to figure out how it can be used as a guide for that individual human being who is intentionally developing. Let me begin at the bottom of the loop where it says evaluation and reflection. This is the point in our journey where we need the driver to have the knowledge of where she is or he is currently located. So to speak in terms of learning and development, the driver must have some notion of what their skill set is. In my organization, we have a number of tools in place that support this step. Like many of your own, you likely have an annual performance management cycle. This is one of those programs deeply embedded in my organization that's developed by our centralized human resources team and managed at the ministry or distributed level where I am. This program is a performance agreement between each employee and their supervisor that guides priority work for the year by individual goal setting in alignment with the organization. Another of those corporate programs that's essential to the performance cycle are our competencies. In the Alberta Public Service, we've identified a number of behavioral competencies. Each of those competencies is broken into subskills, and each is supported by a continuum of descriptive behaviors that represent least to most proficient or complex. For example, one of the competencies is drive for results. One of the subskills or descriptors is plan for results. On the one end of the spectrum is characterized as sets goals and priorities and works to accomplish them, follows through on duties and tasks, and reports on progress. On the other end, that describes someone who demonstrates behaviors such as defines the mission of the work to create action plans and ensures plans are integrated with other initiatives and takes a longer-term focus. In addition to the competencies and their component parts, there are various tools and resources made available to all employees in the organization that help people to understand the competencies and support us in locating ourselves on the continuum, including things like self-assessment tools as well as developmental tips and e-course, among other things. Through the performance process that is implemented between a supervisor and employee, or driver in this metaphor, the driver or employee can come to develop a good understanding of their current state or location on the map on the various competency continuums. Also a part of the same process is the identification of some of the next steps for the employee or driver in regards to knowledge, skills, and development, and ways to move along the continuum. This performance process is conversational, and it's a mutual agreement between supervisor and employee. So through this process that already exists in the organization, the driver now has the knowledge of their current state and indication of next steps. This is the beginning of the map that I was talking about earlier. So through the goal setting embedded in the performance cycle, the employee now has the support of the organization to develop or acquire new knowledge. By means identified between supervisor and employee. For many, the conversation between employee and supervisor at this junction is pivotal. Not only does it provide the formal organizational support for development, but it also allows the employee and supervisor to work out the best or most effective means of acquiring the new knowledge. This new knowledge can be acquired by means of formal training, as we've talked about, or through self-directed learning, meaning individuals dictate the pace and mode of their own learning through methods such as reading or distance learning, for example. Learning through experience, so project work or stretch assignments, for example, or even learning through others, such as communities of practice or job shadowing. Regardless of mode of learning chosen, the individual can now go ahead and acquire that desired knowledge according to their plan. So, new knowledge acquired. Now the driver moves along the pathway. Now the idea with learning for professional purposes is that there is some sort of application of this knowledge and ideas to put into action somehow that will require them to apply their knowledge, implement their plans, or carry out a new way of doing something in their work. But what happens in the middle, as we see it, is the learning support. So here's that rest stop that I had mentioned. This is a piece that's often missed if our maps aren't good enough, or we don't know when we should take an off-ramp and have a rest. In the space between learning and having to apply, we're often left on our own. This part of the learning journey can be lonely and unsettling. This is often where we decide to revert to what we already know, but we just try harder this time instead of trying the new solution or the new plan, making use of our new knowledge. With some intentional support at the rest stop in this lonely space, we increase the likelihood that the new knowledge or next steps will make it to the implementation phase. So here's where we have a variety of options, just like the driver who needs to stop in different places for different purposes. Sometimes you need coffee, sometimes you need gas, and there are different kinds of rest stops or supports that are available here on the learning journey as well. On my team, we suggest these rest stops for refueling that take the form of coaching, mentoring, or using our existing networks and people around us, possibly even fellow learners on our journey. Depending on the driver, destination, and point in the journey, one of these resources is more appropriate than the other. My team has created tools to aid our people in making the right choice for getting the most appropriate intentional learning support, or rather choosing the correct rest stop. After all, you don't stop for coffee if all you need is gas. One of the key tools that we have created for people on the journey draws a distinction between what purpose each of the resources serve. So when do you need a coach versus when do you need a mentor, or when do you need to use people in your own networks? When would those be the best resources? In addition to creating the resources that will aid people in making the right choices along their journey, this implies that we have these resources available. We, in fact, have a strong mentorship program in place. We've been building that, as well as a variety of options for accessing coaching support, both internal and external coaching resources. With appropriate support, the journey along that stretch of the path isn't so lonely and bereft of resources, so that we can follow the loop around comfortably to the application. And then we can evaluate how that implementation went so that we're able to bring that knowledge and information back into the next cycle. Evaluation is a key step on the pathway. If the evaluation does not happen in some form or another, then there's little chance that new knowledge is created. The evaluation doesn't have to be onerous. It may be a simple reflection on how it went and what we might do next time. When that reflection happens, then, there is new knowledge created that is based on experience in context. That's the knowledge that's brand new and can lead to new input again to feed back into the pathway, and the process starts again, but with new knowledge in the journey. This continuation of the process can be fueled by the new knowledge created from the journey on the pathway, like I've just described, or it can be new knowledge from another source, like I spoke about earlier. The point is, the person on the journey gets to make that choice with intentionality, just like a driver should. So there's the loop. Support, application, evaluation, new knowledge, and support on an infinite continual loop. That's the individual pathway that, when made salient, people can begin to understand and access the resources they need to continually develop. It's interesting when many people become more adept in navigating this pathway. The work for the organization then becomes ensuring that resources are in place to sustain multiple people on the pathway. Favorable traveling conditions must be cultivated. And to take the metaphor out of this, the right driving conditions, resources, supports, people, opportunity, and programs must be in place and sustained. When this is done effectively, the organization can reap the collective benefit of the many people who are successfully navigating the pathway and continuously improving and developing, acquiring new skills and implementing them in their workplace on a cycle of continuous improvement and development. So now let's look a bit more closely at the organization and the creation of those conditions. There's also an organizational pathway here that enables the individual pathway that we just talked about. This only makes sense as organizations are comprised of people, and in this particular case, my team, we're also developing and following a pathway. We have a pathway as well that guides us as we foster those optimal traveling conditions for ourselves and for our people. So on this organizational side, we have the responsibility for creating optimum development conditions. There are a few different entry points or on-ramps to this pathway for the organization, but let's start at the bottom with the evaluation step again. Our organization, our larger organization, undertook data collection and rigorous evaluation to inform the evolution of its employee engagement programs. Once again, this is a piece orchestrated by our central human resources that our agile, decentralized team was able to capitalize upon. Based on the results of the evaluation, our organization took a number of steps to address those results in order to improve. My ministry already had a team of people assembled to lead employee engagement efforts, so we had some pre-existing conditions for success established. This team, led by HR, is resourced by representatives from each of the business areas in our ministry to ensure broad representation from across the organization. What this particular evaluation meant for my engagement team was that we were able to use the data to guide next steps in our pathway. This engagement team had already prioritized and formed working groups around recognition, appreciation, and building relationships or community. The data confirmed that strategy that the engagement team had devised, that we were on target, and gave us some additional data for our consideration. One of the issues identified by our employees where there was room for improvement was increased opportunity for learning and career growth. While it's not necessarily intuitive that creating opportunities for learning and career growth could be addressed through the three areas I just mentioned, being recognition, appreciation, and building relationships, we looked at those results, and using the ideation process, we determined that what we could do was offer opportunities for people to develop through our own work. We met a collection of identified individual needs, being the desire for increased learning for career growth, with a corresponding organizational need. Our organization had prioritized employee engagement. This means a sustained effort by the working groups to continue to deliver on engagement programs. The challenge of sustaining a group of this nature is that the people contributing to this work are often doing it off the side of their desks, as we like to say. All the contributors come from the business areas from across the organization, and they're balancing their contribution to this team with their regular responsibilities. It becomes the ongoing work for a committee like this one to continually regenerate its membership base so contributors can contribute when they're able and then leave before they burn themselves out. This would be too ironic for the engagement committee to burn its members out for the sake of engagement. So as I said, our engagement committee met the individual needs expressed by our employees in the engagement survey by identifying a corresponding organizational need. Now, let me tell you about this part of the journey. For the most part, the communications to our organization from our Employee Engagement Committee served two purposes. The first was to invite them to participate in the engagement initiatives we were sponsoring. For example, we'd been encouraging people to connect with colleagues from other teams using various schemes to break down knowledge barriers, building relationships across organizational silos. We were creating live spaces on our internal intranet for people to post photos and interact with each other. We had begun to break down social barriers with the aim of evolving into mobilizing those relationships to share business knowledge. Our team had been creating and socializing ways of demonstrating their appreciation for their colleagues through informal recognition and promotions. We invited people to an all-staff celebration and formal recognition. Now, these probably sound familiar as they're the usual tools of the trade, and we've been quite successful so far. But now the second purpose for our committee communications was to invite people to join the working groups that launch these initiatives and sustain the programs in that continual quest for committee renewal and fresh energy. Our first attempt to build the team was through direct requests. We made direct requests through various channels, such as emails to supervisors to either contribute themselves or support their team members to join us. Then requests to leaders at all levels to identify people with a passion for the work, as well as asking particular standout people in our networks to join us. We used advertising on our internal intranet, appealing through senior leadership and its various modes of communication, encouraging managers to support their people in their participation. But the message was consistently the same: to come and volunteer with the committee. At first, we were able to attract people to the new work because it was an opportunity for some to contribute to a passion project. But this approach was limiting the number of people to whom we were able to draw to us. We were not making our appeal work for the people we were trying to engage. Our invitations to become contributing members of the team served only our own committee needs. Come and volunteer with us. But how many of those requests come to volunteer, come take on more work, add to your list of things to do? How many do most of us get on a daily basis? Coincidentally, that did attract a good number of people with a passion for employee engagement and developing a positive workplace culture, but we wanted to connect with more people on a continual basis, and we wanted to be more integral than a passion project for some. Our requests needed to be more mindful of meeting the needs of people themselves, not just our own. We needed to make a shift in perspective to change the game. We realized that there was something that this high priority committee needed from the organization, and there was also something we could offer back to our people that would meet our organizational need. We had opportunities for our people to develop their competencies through project work that was encouraged and prioritized by our organization. We had that work available. We had a solution to offer both our people who had identified they wanted more opportunities for career development and our organization that had made improved employee engagement a priority. The opportunities for people to contribute to the work of employee engagement could increase the number of people who were engaged, diversify our strategy, as well as offer a part of the solution for our organization to support learning and career development. And being that we were moving beyond just calling for volunteers to a passion project, we were also aiming to diversify our contributing members. A subtle but important shift in perspective. We're not asking people to volunteer, but offering them the opportunity to develop their competencies. We also provided a part of the solution to the organization in terms of talent development and how we are growing our people. We've just passed through that use of data, the need for career development, to inform next steps in our organization, and that's the continuous improvement. Data informed the evolution of our initiative around meeting individual needs with an organizational need. My team and I then stepped into the resources part of our journey. One of our early steps in this particular case was to assess the resources we did not have against some of the work we had to accomplish. We looked at our existing plans and determined the sorts of opportunities we had for people. Essentially, we looked at the work we had to offer to internal employees. And this meant looking at the kind of work available, linking that work to the competencies of the organization, determining deliverables, time commitment, and reporting structures. And this as this was all project work with existing governance structure, most of the work was pretty simple. It was only a matter of pulling it together in an intentional way. We designed a simple template here for recruiting to committees with the idea that we were just the first committee to start the process. There would be others who would utilize this mechanism for attracting talent once the tools were built. Then we designed our interaction with our community. That is the design step on the pathway. This is the intentional construction of the interaction between individuals and the organization. It's the preparation stage for where the organization meets the individuals who have come to the point on their individual pathway where they're looking for the new knowledge. In this case, the design took the form of a communication plan that would create awareness of the new initiative and invite participation of a different sort. At other passes through this stage, this design stage, it has looked different. Sometimes it's designing traditional training or preparing to facilitate a session. This time, it was designing a content page and the mechanisms to drive people to that page. So with our communication plan in place, we were ready to launch and meet our community. So here, this was what we had designed. We offered professional development opportunities to our staff engagement steering committee. It was launched as improve your career potential and develop valuable skills, competencies, and leadership abilities. We describe those, and then we list the opportunities. You can see that the top one on the list is Communications Advisor for the Informal Recognition Group. So, like I said, we were ready to launch and meet our community. Then the path turns back to its own loop for evaluation and assessment in order to determine what was just learned and gathered to engage in continuous improvement and evolve again. Then the process starts again with identifying appropriate resources based on the previous steps along the path. Because of the rapid prototyping approach, it's not necessary to have onerous data collection at every step and evaluation every time we travel the pathway. We had significant data the first time we run around. Next time, it didn't need to be quite so robust. There needs to be enough anecdotal evidence to prompt a response, and the magnitude of that response can be roughly based on the magnitude of your data. There's no hard science, just good judgment. In this particular case, our evaluation was based on a very small data set, but it's enough to continue evolving the prototype. Magnitude of the data set indicates the magnitude of the response. So here's our data. For every day the professional development opportunity page was live, in the first 3 weeks, we had at least one inquiry from a new employee with whom we had not previously had contact, and our working group gained 8 new contributors. That's enough to continue growing the program. Our program evolution is to expand the PD opportunity page to other committees and working groups in the ministry. We're currently working with the Workplace Health and Wellness Committee to join the initiative. In addition, we'll be working to integrate this initiative with our talent development programming. We'll continue to evolve this program, integrating our approach wherever possible based on evidence that we collect as we go. It's an ongoing challenge to continue to enable people, both individuals looking for development as well as enabling people to identify opportunities. It requires leaders to think about their work in different ways that allows them to package it and offer out those opportunities. Our approach to this challenge has been to work with the coalition of the willing and highlight their success for others in the organization to see. We're finding that success, and we have more people who are able to follow the pathway and support the conditions for individuals to find the opportunities both they and our organization need. We will follow the pathway along our own infinity loop. Our on-ramp was understanding the needs and experience of our clients, a la the human-centered design approach. We defined the nature of our challenge and then looked to evaluate and assess our current state. With that, we devised our solution, created our resources, and ensured the conditions were in place to enable people on their journeys. And we're on a continual evaluation loop, or a continual development loop ourselves. Evaluation, continuous improvement, resources, design, community, and around again. So that's my story of 2 pathways, one individual and the other how the organization has come to support it. It's the role of those in the organization to be aware of both journeys so that the environment and the conditions on the pathway are optimized for the learning journey. It's quite likely, in fact, that those people involved in ensuring those optimal travel conditions are those people connecting for resources for learning support like mentors, coaching programs, connecting goal setting with actions, evaluating and evolving a program. Those people are likely traveling their own individual developmental pathway as well as they are on the organizational pathway. Not only are these folks highly aware of the dual loops they are travelers on both sides. Here's the pathway emerged as a single flowing progression. The ultimate goal in using this approach is that it becomes a natural pathway for learners to use. All of the component parts or steps on the pathway are familiar. It's weaving them together intentionally that makes the difference. It's the pathway that allows you to look at what step you are on and determine what's next. What's implied in being able to learn with and through this approach is that you are responsive to emergent challenges. You are able to learn or connect to that ongoing support, like coaching, for example, as you move to implementation every time you travel the pathway. Key is that you demonstrate your willingness to learn from your actions to adjust course. This approach also assumes that you're willing to learn as you go. If there are many of you who join on the pathway, traveling their own path, this contributes to the learning organization. This approach takes courage because you don't know how the whole journey is going to unfold when you begin. All you can say with certainty is that we're going to learn as we go and we're going to get there together. The value of what happens in a community that is responsive to each other and their learning is that they can learn together, encourage each other to be curious, ask those tough questions of each other that may reveal new ways of doing something that can lead us on to creating new knowledge and novel approaches. It demands intentionality as well as the courage to lead and learn. We've learned through this responsive approach that we need to be very curious about how people are experiencing us and our programs, and we need to have many partners spread widely through the organizational business areas so we stay well informed. They've been invaluable in helping us to define what comes next. It has been humbling at times when we don't quite get it right the first time through the pathway, but encouraging in that we know we get the opportunity to try again. It's built right into the journey. The exciting part is that it is naturally finding its way into other aspects of our program. This pathway can be yours. It can belong to you, your organization, and your people. With it, it can be used over and over so people are enabled to own their own journey. I believe people want this empowerment. I believe it's our responsibility to enable each other as human beings to become our best. We can only achieve that through mindfully and intentionally owning our journeys. If we all collectively are able to do that, our people, our organizations, as a result, will be able to rise to the continuous need to evolve and meet the ever-changing demands of our world in all its complexity. We owe it to ourselves to enable each other, and I believe that we can. Thank you. So I pass it over to you now, Alec.
All right, Carla, thank you. If you have a question for Carla, please submit it on that right-hand side of your screen in the chat icon there. That's where all our questions will roll through. We're going to start off with one here, Carla, from Sarah. Sarah's question is, do you have any tips for breaking down the silos? We have monthly happy hours, volunteer events, etc., but haven't figured out to get people across teams and roles to share and learn from each other.
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Of course, all of those things are helpful when you're building those social relationships. What we have found to be most effective for us is trying to connect people for a business purpose. So, of course, they're supported by the social connections that they already have, but then it's we've found taking it to the next level so they have a very real shared outcome. Once people have a shared vested interest in something, the nature of their relationship can change, and that, for us, that's what's been most successful at breaking down the silos, is bringing people together beyond the social and into boardrooms and different projects.
Okay, thank you for that. We're looking at one here. Okay, this next one comes from Deborah. And the question is, do you have any recommended courses related to growth needs that are pre-identified for employees to attend or complete. So anything that you've seen that you thought was useful, I think, is more what the question is.
You know what? One of the courses that we have plenty, sorry, thanks for the question, and we have plenty of things that we have in-house, but one of the courses that I've taken recently that I really enjoyed, it was a course on human-centered design. I really enjoyed the IDEO course. You can take that from wherever you are, and what that really did for me was help me to understand that whole empathy and journey mapping and how that can have an impact on how we understand our people.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Carla. We have another one rolling in here from an attendee named Jennifer. Jennifer's question is, I'm wondering if you had any other structural barriers that you had to address, such as collective agreements that state how opportunities are filled or what is in a job role.
Yeah, we do have collective agreements here in the Alberta Public Service. These, what we're offering are opportunities to develop, and people can't just reach out and do it themselves. They do have to go through their supervisor at whatever level they're on. So it has to connect, like I had mentioned, it needs to connect to their professional growth plan. And so those are formalized agreements that help us to identify how people want to develop, and it also then, by nature of the fact that it's part of that conversation with supervisors, it's okay with our collective agreement.
Okay, perfect. That's all the questions we have in the queue, and we are running out of time here, so I think we'll close things out. So Carla, thank you so much for taking the time to present with us today. It was a pleasure to have you. Hope to work with you again in the future. Thank you to our sponsors of today's Spotlight webinar at Cornerstone OnDemand. But mostly, I want to thank everybody in the audience for their participation. We had a lot of interaction with your questions earlier in. People were submitting those through the Q&A portion as well, so we appreciate that. If you enjoyed today's presentation, please take a moment to fill out today's post-event survey, which you will be directed to right after this webinar closes. Obviously, your feedback is always very important to us. So thank you once more to Carla, Cornerstone, and our attendees. We'll see everybody back here for our next Chief Learning Officer webinar that takes place on Tuesday, May 16th at 2 p.m. Eastern, and that's titled Applying Brain Science in Online Learning Design, a Practical Approach. Again, I just want to reiterate that today's webinar was recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording, your HRCI insurance certification codes, and a PDF in that follow-up email, so please keep an eye on that over the next couple of days. Thank you once more, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.